Now, I want to move on to a really serious issue here, and it is one of those touchstone issues. It defines whether you describe yourself as a social conservative or a social liberal, and this is a subject on which, personally, I've gone on a bit of a journey. I want to talk about abortion, because Alabama has become the latest US state to move to restrict abortions by passing a bill to outlaw abortion in virtually all cases. And this includes a ban on abortion in cases of rape or incest. Now, supporters say they expect the law to be blocked in court, but hope that the appeals process will bring it to the Supreme Court. They want the court, which now has a Conservative majority, to overturn the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling legalising abortion in the United States. Now, Alabama's 35-seat Senate is dominated by men. None of its 4 female senators backed the ban, which will now go to the governor, Kay Ivey, and she said she will only sign it into law once she's considered it, but she is apparently very conservative, so it's likely that she will do that. Now, 16 other states are seeking to impose new restrictions on abortion. Well, earlier this year, the Supreme Court blocked implementation of new abortion restrictions in Louisiana, but the ruling was made by a narrow margin, and the case is due to be reviewed later this year. Now, I was watching some footage of this ruling, and all of the Republican state senators who voted for it were all white men. And I did think to myself, is this really the sort of thing that should be ruled on just by men? And that's not me being politically correct or just a sort of social liberal. If we were having this conversation 15 or 20 years ago, I would have described myself as basically pro-life and anti-abortion, because I do believe that life starts at conception. And I wouldn't have argued in favour of this bill, because I think banning abortion in cases of rape or incest is just absolutely inhuman. I would not do that. But over the last few years, I have changed my mind on this. I do think that we have to be pragmatists. And we have to accept that abortions have been carried out since time immemorial, and whatever the law says, they will continue to be so. And therefore, surely the best thing to do is to regulate this and make sure that if a woman does have an abortion, it's carried out safely. We do not want to go back to the days of backstreet abortions, nor do we want, in my view, to make in any way clear that abortion is some form of contraception, because it simply is not. A civilised society has to recognise that some women will want abortions, and therefore that has to be facilitated, however repugnant many people will find that thought. And we have a system in this country where you can have an abortion up to the 24th week of a pregnancy. Now, I personally, and this is just a personal view, I would like to see that reduced to 20 weeks, because medical science has advanced and a baby can exist outside the womb at certainly 22 weeks, and nowadays some at 20 weeks. And I think that is, again, the humane thing to do. So when you look at the laws that are being passed throughout the United States, not just in Alabama, there's neighbouring Georgia, they have what's called the heartbeat law, where an abortion can be carried out only up to the 6th week of pregnancy. Well, of course, many women don't know that they're pregnant after 6 weeks. And that kind of law is being passed in other states as well. Now, in Northern Ireland, it is still illegal for a woman to have an abortion. To my mind, this is something that ought to be subject to UK law, not Northern Ireland law, and there are movements now in the House of Commons to make sure that happens. Now, that will create a big political row in Northern Ireland, but I think it's a row which probably has to be had. You have the Republic of Ireland voting in a referendum to allow abortion, albeit in restrictive circumstances, but that was a big breakthrough in many ways, and yet in the north of the country, you're not. And there was a case recently of a 14-year-old girl who had been raped by her uncle. She had to travel to Liverpool to have an abortion. She was accompanied by the police, believe it or not, and DNA swabs of the aborted fetus were taken to prove that the DNA was from her uncle. Now, can anyone tell me that that's a humane thing to happen? And that at least the travel element would have been taken out of it if abortion was illegal in Northern Ireland. I don't want to see the number of abortions increase. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that the number of abortions is actually coming down in this country. Well, a good thing too. But do you not agree with me that we have to be pragmatic about this? It is no good looking at either extreme of the argument. On one extreme, wanting to ban abortion completely, and the other extreme, wanting to allow abortion up to birth. And believe me, there are people that actually advocate that. I mean, unbelievably in my view, but there are. Not many, but they are there. You've got to have a pragmatic solution to this. And I think that in this country, we have the law just about right, even though I would like to see the term limit reduced. But sitting here as a man chairing this conversation, if you like, I kind of feel that it's not even my place to offer an opinion. It is something that a woman has a right to have an opinion on, I think, far more than a man. Now, you might say, well, okay, well, it's the man that helps make the baby, so the man is obviously entitled to a view as well. You're entitled to a view, but I'm not sure that the male view on this is entitled to trump the female view. But, I mean, even there, as I say that, I'm thinking there'll be howls of outrage with me saying that, because it does take two to make a baby. So, in the light of this decision in America, what do you think of well, first of all, why do you think abortion is such a big political issue in the US? And it really is. And if you're from the US and would like to give me a call, I'd love to hear from you. But how would you like to see UK abortion laws reformed? Would you like to see them relaxed? Would you like to see them tightened? And if so, how? 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk to Aisling Goodison, who's a spokesperson for the Centre of Bioethical Reform, a pro-life organisation. Aisling, very good to talk to you. And what's your interpretation of this law that's been passed by the State Senate in Alabama?
Yes, thank you for having me on. I think it's a real testimony, a breakthrough for human rights. What they've done in Alabama is they are recognizing the most foundational basic human right, the right to life, needs to be protected under law. So they're really flagging this issue, and they're not the only state that's doing this. We've seen a number of states in the US awaken to the reality of abortion, and we've seen the Center for Medical Progress and different organizations exposing the issue of abortion in the US by showing a footage of aborted fetuses, of embryos that have been aborted. And by seeing that graphic reality, we're seeing a lot more people awaken to this human rights violation. So I really do think that that this is a human rights breakthrough in the law, in the Parliament.
And what about the mother's human right to own her own body and decide what happens to it?
Yeah, so totally, I believe a woman has the right to choose what happens to her body, but when it comes to another person's body, then our rights have limits. So the unborn child's right to life must trump a woman's right to choose, simply because the right to life must be the foundational human right that is protected under law, because without that right, we don't have the right to choose.
What is the point in bringing an unwanted child into the world?
Well, that's like saying there's so many unwanted children in the world as it is already. Is our solution to unwanted children to kill unwanted children, or do we think, okay, there's a problem here, so let's try and alleviate that problem? Let's in a different way. So unwantedness is the issue, not the child itself.
And you would back this law, which includes a ban on abortion in cases of rape or incest?
And so I think that rape is one of the worst crimes that's committed against women. And the rapist should suffer for his crime and be locked up, undoubtedly. But should we give the child the worst penalty than the rapist? Should we kill the child for the father's crime? So the question all comes back to, again, what is the unborn? Because if they're not human beings, yeah, sure, have abortion up to full term if they're not human beings. But if they are human beings, then this is a much more serious issue. And we know that the science of embryology is absolutely clear that human life begins at the very moment of fertilization.
So you expect a woman, you expect a woman who has been raped to carry a child, have the child, and then look after it, do you? Because I think that a lot of people who've been in that situation would think that you're living on a different planet to the one that they inhabit.
Well, of course, I think that a woman who's been raped, there's been a horrific violation done against her and against her rights. And so she needs counselling, love, care, support. But an abortion is going to give her none of that. It's not going to unrape her. It's not going to give her that support, that counselling, that care that she needs. So to add another violation on someone else's human rights onto that situation is not the best solution that we have for women.
If the woman wants to have the abortion, I would say that is her prerogative, particularly in the case of rape.
Well, then we need to look again. It comes back to, again, what is an abortion and what are the unborn? Because if they're not human beings, yes, absolutely, she can have an abortion. But if they are, then what's the abortion going to do to that child? It's going to literally dismember, decapitate, disembowel, poison another human being for a father's crime. The father should be punished, not the unborn child. So if we weren't talking about abortion, if we were talking about something else, yeah, fine. But we're not. We're talking about another violation of someone else's rights.
So the 14, I think you were listening when I was talking about the 14-year-old from Belfast. You actually think that the 14-year-old from Belfast who was raped by her uncle, you think she should have had that child?
I think that all of us, I think everyone who hears that story will have incredible empathy and compassion for that 14-year-old girl. But we cannot take one very specific, tough case and apply it to the rest of this issue. Because if we think about it, it's less than 2% of abortions are done in the situation of rape. And so abortion as a whole, even in the UK, is done for social reasons. And that's very much the same in the US as well. So we're talking about a much bigger issue here. You know, 1 in 3 women here have at least one abortion, 1 in 4 babies that are aborted on the scale of 200,000 a year. So these very tough circumstances, like the Roe v. Wade case, they pushed abortion into the US. And that, you know, one tough case legalized it and allowed abortion. They've had more than 50 million abortions there since it was legalised for the case of one tough situation.
Let me take a more extreme example. What about a brother who rapes his sister and the child is inevitably going to be deformed? You think that child should still be brought into the world?
So I'm not going to disagree with you that there are so many difficult situations.
But that's the point. I don't think you can be absolutist on one side or the other, but you sound as if you are being absolutist.
So I would say we have to draw this back out again to the question, what are the unborn? Because if we apply that situation to a woman, let's say, who decides to keep the child, maybe she has a 2-year-old and that child was conceived in rape and that 2-year-old reminds her of the rape, do we say that she can kill the 2-year-old because it reminds her of that difficult situation? Of course not. Our solution to a difficult situation is never to kill another person. So what's the difference between killing that same child when they're simply a bit younger?
The difference is very simple because the child hasn't been born. And if you can abort the child within a few days or a few weeks of the rape, then I would say that's entirely different to a child that's 2 years old. And you know it is.
So I would say the difference is, yes, they're younger, age. You know, they're smaller, they're in a different location, they're younger. But
well, they're not just younger.
I mean, I haven't changed from when I was the age I am now to being a 10-year-old, to being a 5-year-old. Yes, my age has changed, my level of development has, my location sometimes changes. But if you are a
4-week-old fetus, you have no functional brain, you have no functional emotional intelligence, you probably don't even feel pain at 4 weeks.
Right.
So therefore, you cannot compare a 4-week-old fetus with a 2-year-old child, can you?
Sure, but we cannot. Is it right for us to base our human rights on how we function? Shouldn't our human rights be based on the one thing we all have in common, which is our humanity? Because if we start basing it on how we function, I mean, someone who has Alzheimer's, they're functioning less. Someone who is, let's say, under anaesthetic, they're not functioning, they haven't got, they're not conscious, they're not self-aware, they can't feel pain yet. We don't say if someone's under anaesthetic that they're not human beings, because they don't have specific functions. This is why I believe it's really dangerous when we start basing our human rights on how we function. I mean, if you take, for example, Peter Singer, he's a famous philosopher. He believes that our personhood should be based on when we have consciousness. And he doesn't believe that that's until after we're born, actually, until we're maybe 2 years old.
Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, we say that's ridiculous, but, this line was initially drawn before we had abortion anywhere in the world. The line was drawn that your human rights began when you became a human being, and that was at the moment of fertilization. Now, we don't like that rule because actually that prevents us from having the sexual freedoms that we want to have in our society.
I don't know what your views on these issues are, but what I find in the United States, the hypocrisy of the views of many pro-life campaigners is they are the first to advocate gun ownership. They're the first to advocate capital punishment. So they're quite happy to see people convicted of crimes get the electric chair, but they won't consider abortion.
Well, that's not at all. I'm not even going into that.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not accusing you of that, but in America, that is the case.
That's probably quite massive stereotyping. But as an organisation, I work for the Centre for Birth Reform, and we are totally against any forms of violence done against anyone, done against.
Okay.
We believe that every human being deserves the right to life.
Aisling, thank you very much. That's Aisling Goodison from the Centre of Bioethical Reform. Well, what do you make of that?